What up, Light Watkins?
What's happening?
Thanks for being here.
Lugavere.
Yo, so before we kick things off, I just got a delivery of Fire Cider,
Okay.
which is a product that I really enjoy, and I have zero affiliation with them. But they just because it just came, and I feel like you've never had it before, this is gonna be an experience for you.
Is this like your version of that hot wings show that all those celebrities are on? They have to eat the hot wings.
They have to eat weird
and as
spicy
they answer
things.
Questions.
I guess this is like that, yeah. So
You're gonna make it a drinking game, perhaps.
So you guys like listening can watch what we're about to do on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/maxlugavere. But if you're just listening in, Fire Ciders is a really cool product that I discovered, and it's mostly apple cider vinegar, but they also add in oranges, lemons, onions, ginger, horseradish, garlic, turmeric, habanero pepper, and black pepper. So it's got all these really healthy ingredients in it, and it's just like you take like I would say half a shot of it or less, and it wakes you up.
Where did you first experience it?
My brothers discovered it.
Oh, okay.
And they turned me onto it.
They're like, Max would love this shit.
Yeah, I mean, you could take like a sip of it here and there. You can also use it as a base for like salad dressings. And
I can smell it.
Can you smell it?
Yeah, it's not even close to my nose, and I can smell it. It's like if you were passing by the New York sewer on and you get a whiff, and that summertime whiff.
Because the garlic and the onions, yeah, it's
like
pungent.
somebody just pissed over there, and it kind of looks like it too. So
bottoms up. Woo!
Yep.
How's it taste?
About what you would think it would taste like.
Oh, spicy. So good though. I like it. What do you think? Is it burning back of your throat or?
No, it's not so bad.
It's not so bad.
I've had stronger things in my life.
It's like an elixir. I think it's.
Yeah. It kind of sucks, man, that literally everything that's good for you tastes like crap. Like, how awesome would it be if cake was like the healthiest thing you could eat, and fries amazing. And stuff like that.
But isn't it true? And I feel like you know this, and you can speak to this probably better than most, that most of the things in life that are good for you usually are not the most comfortable to endure.
I would agree with that. Most of the things. There's some things though that are exceptions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like intimacy. Intimacy is nice. Until you get somebody pregnant, and then, having a baby, that's a little bit uncomfortable.
But intimacy is not easy necessarily, right?
Well, we've screwed it up in our society, I've been reading this book on relationships by the School of Life. Have you heard of the School of Life?
In London.
Yeah, in London. Alain de Botton.
Oh my God, huge fan.
Yeah. So he basically, for those of you who don't know, Alain de Botton, he has deconstructed the whole idea behind romanticism and how that's kind of screwed up our modern day coupling and the rituals around it, because there's this presupposition that love, to be in love means that you're with someone who is able to read your mind, and they're your one and only, and they can do everything, and so if your partner doesn't meet those criteria, then you start to think that they're not your soulmate. And historically speaking, before about 1750, people got married for very practical reasons, or they coupled up for very practical reasons, and those reasons today would seem very off. If somebody said, well, I'm with you because you make good money. That's why I'm with you.
Right.
Or I'm with you because you own a lot of property, or I'm with you because you need help in the kitchen. Like, all of those reasons would seem like the worst reasons to get with someone. But that was why people got together pretty much from the dawn of man up until about 1750. And then the poets and the philosophers in Europe, and after the 1750s, started romanticizing relationships.
Whoa.
And now our standard for excellence in relationships is, he gets me, he understands me without me having to say anything, and all of these kinds of really off things that we've normalized as this is what you're actually aspiring towards. Then you add social media to that, and the whole thing just goes bonkers.
Was that do you think that was a turn for the positive?
No. I mean, I don't know if getting with someone because you have things that they want, material things that they want, or because you need labor. I don't know if that's where we want to be either. I think there's got to be a little bit of both. I think we just got to be, I think what's missing, honestly, is honesty. I think honesty is missing. I think we've been conditioned not to be honest with ourselves around it. And on top of that, you have the film industry and this whole idea of you complete me, even though we say that you're supposed to be fulfilled, people don't behave like that when it comes to relationships. And I think we have to be honest about it,
Yeah, you have a lot of people stuck in relationships because of this ideal, that they're going to coexist together happily ever after. And sometimes that pairing is not necessarily the best partnership in the practical real world sense.
And nobody really talks about the fact that the happiness needs to come from within you. Like that's where the happy ever after comes from is this you. A lot of people, they'll like do the work to get in a relationship, and then they'll just kind of stop doing the work because they got the prize. They see the relationship as the prize. But I say that's where you really need to double down on the work, because in order to maintain a relationship, you really have to be self-realized to a certain extent. And that's what's missing.
That notion of meeting another person who's going to complete you, right? So you would say that's pretty much bunk. You've got to be complete yourself.
Yeah, you got to be complete. Well, you don't have to be, but you just have to understand the principles that relationship, and I wrote about this today, that relationship is never going to be the source of your happiness. And any thinking otherwise is you being essentially delusional. The relationship can only ever be a showcase for the happiness or lack thereof that you have inside. So if you're miserable and you're in a relationship with somebody who's happy, that relationship is going to be 50% misery and 50% happiness. And then eventually the person who is bringing all the happiness to the relationship is going to feel dissatisfied, and then that's going to create tension, and then it's going to be unbalanced. And so, and the miserable person may project their misery onto that happy person and think, you're not doing enough for me. I'm supposed to be feeling safe with you, which is a kind of a code word for you're supposed to make me happy. And it's not going to happen. It's not always a code for that, but I think a lot of times when we say that, that's what we're essentially saying.
Yeah.
Is that you're not meeting enough of my needs. And I can't be myself when I'm with someone like you. And I think we just need to take more personal responsibility.
God, relationships are hard.
They are.
They don't have to be. But
do you know anybody who's in a relationship that's not challenging? That doesn't challenge them?
I don't.
See, I think relationships are like college courses. Like you take a course to be challenged. You take it because you know that you're going to be learning something that you didn't know beforehand.
Wow.
And then if you get to the end of that one, then you may elect to take the next higher version of that subject, right? And you keep doing that. And maybe one day you wake up and you're like, I'm going to get a PhD in this thing. And then maybe one day I want to teach it. And so I think relationships are kind of like that, in that we're learning without realizing that we're learning, but we're thinking that this is supposed to make me comfortable, right? And that's not really what it's set up to do. Is to make you comfortable. It's set up to challenge you in certain ways. So I think when you understand that and you lean into it, then it becomes more interesting, because you're getting the point. You're showing up for class now, and you're right in the front row, and you're paying attention to the teaching, to the learnings, instead of being in the back of the room, talking crap about the teacher, who's your partner or whatever dynamic in the relationship. And missing all the lessons, and then homework and pop quizzes, and you're not prepared for any of it, and you end up sabotaging yourself.
Story of my academic life. I love that perception shift, though, because it's so optimistic. It's all about it's a glass half full kind of outlook on relationships, which I definitely appreciate.
Well, the other thing that's interesting about relationships, and I know this is not probably what we came here to talk about, but it's interesting how when you're not in a relationship, you desire to be in a relationship. And when you are in a relationship, a part of you is going, oh man, I got to get out of this.
Oh my God. Yes.
Like there's tension in both sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think because of that, there's our sort of natural inclination is to relate to someone else and to be in that dynamic. Now, what's up for debate is this supposed to be a lifelong thing? Am I supposed to be monogamous? Like, I'm not saying one way or the other, but there's some historical evidence. I don't know if you ever read Sex at Dawn, but
By Christopher Ryan.
yeah.
Yeah.
Have you interviewed him or something like that?
No, but I was a fan of his blog. He used to have a blog on Psychology Today. I don't know if he still does. And I was a fan of his blog. And then just a couple of years ago, I think around the time that his book came out, I kind of lost track of what he was up to.
Yeah.
But I'm a fan generally.
He talks about how there's no historical evidence for monogamy, right?
Wow.
Which again, I'm a serial monogamist.
Mhm.
So, but I'm also aware that there's no evidence for it. And you, as someone who's, you're living and teaching the genius life, right? That's not really how we eat food in our modern society, right? French fries and pizza and all that is a part of the normal diet. And you may indulge in that, but you're still aware that the brain operates in a healthier way from eating these kinds of foods. And I just think, having that sort of healthy relationship with history and with what we're experiencing now helps you make better choices and understand things through a lens of what our ancestors were up to. And if you are having a lot more tension, then you don't feel bad about it. You're like, okay, well, this is what happens because we're basically trying to force this system in our modern day relationship that's not really that natural. But that doesn't mean we can't do it, because culturally that's what's most acceptable. But we just have to choose it. We have to actively wake up every morning and recommit to this choosing of this way of life. And maybe if I do that, it can work. But if I deny it, now I'm adding a whole other thing on top of the incongruency of what I'm feeling inside and what I'm experiencing on the outside.
So what are your feelings then on marriage?
I think marriage needs to be reimagined. I think the idea of being in a lifetime partnership is awesome, and can be very rewarding. But I think the conventional idea of I own you for life, basically, is what we're saying. I mean, if you think about that, you wouldn't sign any other type of agreement in any other aspect of life saying that once I do this, I'm in it for life.
Right.
Like you would never do that. And some people are doing that after only knowing someone for a few months. Now, imagine the thought experiment I like to play with people is for those of you who are not married or maybe recently married and you're in your 30s or 40s or whatever. Imagine if you had to commit to your boyfriend when you were 19 years old or girlfriend when you were that age for life, right? Imagine how much you've grown and how much more you know about yourself and your preferences and the world, how the world works in that span of time, and how much of a nightmare that would have been trying to keep the same chemistry that was present at your 19-year-old self all these years, right? I'm not saying it's impossible, but statistically speaking, it's not likely that would have lasted, right? And so I think the idea of marriage is great, but like the college course, if you were to take, no one would take a college course that you were stuck in for life, right? That just no one would enroll in that unless you were completely insane.
Right.
So when it comes to jobs, when it comes to studies, we celebrate making decisions that are in alignment with our passion, our purpose, our heart, whatever that may be. And if it changes and we're confident about it, that gets celebrated. With marriage, if somebody wakes up in their 40s or 50s and they realize, you know what, I'm not the same person I was when we got married. I'm now into this other thing, or I want to be by myself or whatever. You're seen as a failure, basically, and you're shamed. And, and there's all this weight behind the things you say and the things that you do, even though maybe you profess to still be very much in love with this other person. You're just having these other life experiences. And so I think there's a lot of room for acceptance and adapting to how people grow and how people evolve and how they change and how their worldview expands over time. And and we need to get it out of this whole TSA sort of, lowest common denominator approach to coupling. What do you think?
I think that, marriage is this. There's this famous quote. I don't know who said it, but it's like, marriage is a wonderful institution, but who wants to be in an institution? I don't know who said that. It was one of my favorite lines. No, I definitely believe that as a symbol of one person's commitment to another, I think it's very nice. It's a very nice ideal. But the whole till death do us part thing, which you've already articulated, I don't think is practical, especially today when we're living longer and longer than we have in the past. And I think that divorce is also okay. I think we should destigmatize divorce. Because some people, they get married and marriage doesn't always work out. Statistically, we know that it's like something like 1 in 2, or there's like I don't know the exact numbers, but I know that a significant proportion of marriages don't actually end up working out. And I think that that's okay. That's fine.
I think the statistic is 70%.
Is it 70%?
There's a 50% divorce rate, right? And then there's an accounting for the other percentage of marriages that probably should end in divorce, but people try to white knuckle it. So they say that there's some divorce attorney who was doing the podcast circuit not that long ago, and he was talking about how only about 25% of marriages would be considered successful by the people in the actual marriages.
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be we should only get into these kinds of arrangements with people who we are serious about, and it should be difficult to undo them. And I think that's for the sake of the family, like children and whatnot. I think that marriage as a social institution probably has some degree of merit. It's not an area that I've like studied at all, but I know that me personally, and I came from a family, my mom and dad were like, they fought the entirety of my childhood, but they were together up until I turned 18. And I benefited from the fact that my parents were together during that time. And I don't think it's as easy for kids who come from broken homes, for example. And again, I'm not really saying this from a place of like being all too informed on the subject, but I'm just, from my personal experience, I'm just, I'm also happy that my parents did get a divorce when they did, and that they were both able to kind of go their own separate ways and find peace for themselves.
See, I think it should be hard to get out in proportion to how long you've been together and if you have kids or not. So, for instance, what if a marriage was a 5-year long situation, and then at that 5-year mark, kind of like with your driver's license, you have to renew it. You have to go in, you answer questions, and you have to agree, hey, do we want to do this for another 5 years, or do we want to go our separate ways? And there's no issue one way or the other.
It expires.
Yeah, it expires. Exactly.
I like that idea.
And you have to renew it. And if you have kids, if you have like one kid, then there's a little bit of a penalty. Whoever has the most, whatever, money has this there's a percentage. Maybe you have to give 20% of that. If you have 2 kids, then you have to give like 30%. If you have 3 kids, you have to give like 50%, like that. Or if you've been together for 20 years and then you decide not to renew, then you have to give a certain portion. But if you've only been together for 5 years, you don't have any kids, that's a long enough time to really get to know somebody.
Yeah.
And if you decide, hey, you know what, you were nice, this is great, but I think I'm going to do this other thing, then that should be perfectly fine.
Yeah. Very interesting.
That's the kind of situation. But I think it really only works if everybody is doing it.
Yeah. Earlier you kind of talked about this this quandary where if you're not in a relationship, you long to be in one, and if you're in a relationship, you long to be single, out of the relationship. And that's sort of like, what do we do about that grass is always greener on the other side phenomena? Like you're a learned man, you're a meditation teacher, so I feel like you've got to have answers for us. That's I feel like this perpetual cycle that we're always, all of us,
Yeah.
tend towards as humans.
My answer to that is very simple. I think you just have to understand that it's natural. If you understand that it's natural and it's not something that is exceptional, right? It doesn't mean that you're not destined to be with this person in this moment in time and you're supposed to be somewhere else. And that longing is your sign from the universe that, fate is trying to move you in this other direction. And you built this whole story, this whole narrative around it. That's where we get into problems, right? We go to the tarot card reader and they pull the card and it's like, oh, look, you're the frog. You're supposed to be, going to find your prince. And you think about your partner and you're like, they're definitely not my prince. But I think if we understand that this is just natural, just like when you're on social media, there's nothing inherently wrong with social media, but it is a breeding ground for comparison. And you looking at here's what's funny about it. You're looking at somebody in Thailand or wherever, and they're on the beach and it looks like they're having the time of their life. What do you think they're doing in Thailand? They're looking at you in LA going, oh my God, I got to get back to LA. They're having an amazing time. Like everybody's doing the same thing no matter where you are. There's nobody in any environment in the world who's on social media who's thinking, oh, this is amazing. I don't want to even touch my phone. I just want to be here. Like if your phone is there and it's on within about an hour, you're going to pick up the social media app and scroll through it, right? Unless you're actively doing something like zip lining or something where you just can't get your phone. But otherwise, you're either filming it to post or you're looking at other people's posts, right? Nobody's being present right now. So I think it's a lot like that. You have to understand this is just the nature of the beast. When I'm in these things or when I'm out of these relationships, there's gonna be some longing. And that's fine. That's just what it is. Everybody's going through it. So don't think you're the only one and don't think it has to mean anything.
Also, I feel like, that saying, wherever you go, there you are. It's like, you're the same person and you're having the same quality of thoughts wherever you happen to be, whether you've got 1,000 followers on Instagram or 100,000 followers on Instagram, whether you're home in LA or, Jersey City, wherever that happens to be, wherever you are, or in Bali or in, Rio de Janeiro. So that's why I think comparison is it's like an illusion, because you're going to be the same person wherever you happen to be. And also what you don't get on social media are like the negative take. That person could be traveling somewhere in a resort and the food could be terrible. They're not posting about that.
Right. They get Montezuma's revenge and they're not posting about
the crazy diarrhea that almost killed them. Funny story. I was in Rio de Janeiro once and I got I had like a 12-hour bout of food poisoning and it was just coming out of both ends, like liquid. I was getting so dehydrated so quickly that I couldn't even stand. At a certain point, I was like hugging the toilet of I was like in a hostel, and my brother had to like walk me to like the local emergency room. I had to get like IV fluids. So that's like random tangent, but I didn't post about that on social media.
No, of course not.
Yeah, that's the point. I wasn't posting about that. I posted about my awesome trip in Brazil.
Yeah, and it's like what Alan Watts says. He says the only Zen that you're going to find at a mountaintop is the Zen you bring up there with you, right? And so that's just circling it back to meditation. That's the practical value of investing the time to do your inner work, is because you're essentially expanding your awareness beyond the narrow bandwidth of what you're missing out on. And then you can start to see, oh, wow, look, I'm grateful for this about this moment. I'm grateful for that about this moment. I'm grateful for my immune system. I'm grateful for the fact that I can afford to stay in this hotel. So it just keeps expanding. And even though you're having a time that some people would describe as miserable, and maybe you would as well, you can also at the same time see the sort of silver lining in the moment, right? And that's the real mastery behind the practice. Like nobody cares what you're experiencing in the meditation if you can't find that level of present moment awareness in a otherwise bad situation, right? That's where the whole thing really plays out, is when you're in those kinds of situations. Are you going to be okay, right? Because that's just one iteration of I would rather be in a different kind of relationship, right? You're in a relationship with diarrhea in that moment.
Yeah.
And you'd rather not be in that relationship, but you're in it, and it's a process. You kind of have to go through it. You kind of know what you have to do and blah, blah, blah. And so if we can if we can stay in tune with our internal cues, then we'll find that more often than not, we'll be guided to do the thing that will keep the relationships that we experience fresh enough to stay more or less engaged and present.
I love that. So you've been doing these daily inspirational emails to your tribe. What kinds of things have been coming up for you lately? You said you've been doing these for the past 5 years.
Almost
right?
5 years, yeah. And it's been a process. When I first started out, I was inspired by Seth Godin. He's been doing a daily email forever. And then there's another friend of mine named Jeff Kober, who's a meditation teacher, and he was doing a daily email forever. And knowing myself, I was like, there's no way I'd be able to remember to do a daily email every day and wake up and, go through the whole process. And I ignored the calling to do it for probably a couple of years. And then it just kept coming back, just like I'm sure with you and your podcast, and you probably thought about doing it forever, and it just never went away. And you knew that, okay, at some point I gotta actually take the next step. So I decided, screw it, I'm just gonna do it and see what happens. And I knew for a fact that I was gonna run out of content within about 30 days, right? I had about 30 days worth of material to write that I thought was decent enough to send out to my email list. So I started writing every day. It was going to go out at 6 a.m. Pacific time, which meant that I was either going to have to stay up late the night before or wake up really early the morning of and write this thing and send it out. And it's a really powerful exercise in making it public, because then you really have to kind of, you can't just send out a bunch of crap. You have to really pay attention, because as you know, people will let you know right away what they don't like, and more so than what they like. They'll let you know what they don't like. Like, you can send out 100 of these things, and the one time you miscredit something or you misspell something, you get all this flurry of emails correcting you, because people love, for some reason, to correct other people without regarding all the time and effort it probably took this person to put together this entire body of work.
People just sitting there behind the screen like,
Yeah, just judging.
I gotta let Light know what I think.
Right. Like, Light's sitting around waiting. And here's the thing: as a creator, you already know. You already know what, when the thing goes out. The first thing, I read it like 5 times, and that's where I see all the mistakes. Is as soon as it goes out. I didn't see any of them beforehand because I was so blind to them, because I was just staring at it so long and going over it so many times. But I'll misspell meditation in the title or something like that when it finally goes out. And then I get these emails. Did you mean meditation or did you mean mediation? So anyway, after 30 days, I ran out of material, just like I thought. But what was interesting was I found that the process of committing to do it every day, it was starting to generate content. So stuff was coming through me because I was showing up every day. And that was something I kind of understood intellectually, but it was still amazing and surprising to feel it in the moment. Because then I got to the point where I started relying on it. And I still do have a very strong commitment with it. Like, I will not send something out unless it feels right to send out. And what that means is, a lot of times I get in my own way. Like, I'll think, okay, I'm going to take over. This is what it needs to be, blah, blah, blah. And I'll write out this thing. And then usually if I have time, I'll take a break from it. And then I'll come back to it. And it's like, it's all ego, validation, verification, ego. It's like, wow, I can't send that out. And then I'll go to sleep and wake up the next morning. And that's when the real daily dose comes through, right? It'll come through in my sort of least excited state, and I wake up and I have the whole thing, and it's like I'm giving birth, and I get up and I type it all out, and it's a completely different message to the one that I was going to send out the previous night. And that's happened literally hundreds of times, if not thousands of times at this point. And now I got to the point where I just, I mean, after you've been doing it for over 4 years, you can't plan it. You just have to trust that it's going to happen. And as long as you show up, that's your job, and then you just surrender to the process.
I think it's a testament to the power of inertia. You ever think about that or play with that idea? How it's when you're stagnant, it's so easy to stay stagnant. But once you're already in motion, like an object in motion wants to stay in motion. So by committing to those 30 days, it was sort of like you had already started that siphon of like getting content out, expressing it, taking like these like, perhaps abstract ideas and verbalizing it, putting it down into like the written English language. And then once you have that pipeline sort of open, it just becomes a lot easier to like stay in that creative channel.
Yeah, there's a wonderful William Faulkner anecdote where I guess some journalist was interviewing him and asked him, "Hey, you're a writer, do you write on a schedule, a daily schedule, or do you just write whenever you get inspired?" And he thought about it for a second and he says, "I write when I get inspired." And lucky for me, the inspiration comes at 9:00 every morning. So, it's not one or the other. It's both. You have to show up, and the inspiration is generated from you showing up.
So what are the kinds of topics that you find yourself gravitating to today? We're in very interesting, unprecedented times.
It's interesting you make that distinction because I was just, when you first started asking the question, I immediately went to, it's changed so much since the beginning. In the beginning days, I had this whole structure where I was doing like, on Mondays, I do like a poem, and on Tuesdays, I do like a personal story, and on Wednesdays, I do some sort of anecdote. And so now, since I got all that out of my system, now it's kind of gotten to this sort of very digestible, bite-sized, mostly observational content, and mostly inspired by current events. So whatever I'm feeling, I try to find a way to express that, to give people perspective that will allow them to tap into their own power. Like that's kind of my intention when I'm writing. So it won't be something that makes you feel worse than you felt when you read it. So it's got to make you feel better. It ideally needs to be a little bit anecdotal, right? And it's got to be honest. It's got to be truthful for me, for my own experience. And it's got to be accessible, right? I can't make anybody feel bad about their current situation. So when I'm writing, I'll write something and then I'll think, okay, well, let's say I was suicidal and I read this. How would I read it? Now I've never been suicidal, so I have no idea how it would really read, but I've had friends and people close to me who have committed suicide and who've been close to committing suicide. So I take it through that filter. I say, if I was impoverished, how would I read this? If I was the victim of sexual abuse, how would I read this? If I was the victim of, police brutality, how would I read this? And if it passes all of those filters, then I know, okay, it's ready to go out. And that's, again, that's the result of making it public and getting lots of feedback, because people from all of those situations have responded saying, well, you didn't think about this consideration or that consideration. And the truth of the matter is I probably did think about it. I just didn't think it was that, I think, there's a way to kind of express this stuff where you can counter their argument before they even have it. And I didn't do that. So I probably thought about it, but I didn't think it was important enough to actually add that disclaimer to the things in the sense that I'm saying something like, writing my thing, everything is great, everything is happy. Obviously, if you're a victim of sexual abuse, that's a different situation. And then getting back to the point, blah, 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 blah. So I learned how to artfully add those disclaimers in there so you're not triggering people, because some people will get very, very triggered. Some people just want to get triggered. They're looking to get triggered, and that I can't do anything about those people. But it's been a fun challenge, because it's easy to let yourself off the hook and be like, they just got to deal with it. But I like to challenge myself, like, okay, well, if I was going to consider that situation, how would I say it, right? And maybe I don't have to put this part in there that will trigger that group of people. And I'll take it out and I'll read it again. And if it reads well, then it's like, okay, fine. That doesn't need to be there, So that's been the process.
Yeah, it's not an easy task though, trying to be specific in your messaging while also accounting for all the possible permutations of ways that people could interpret your message, especially when you have a huge following like you do. It's like, how do you do that without driving yourself nuts every time you post?
Yeah, you don't. I mean, so my writing is one thing. And then I have my daily videos that I post on Instagram. And I tend to be a little bit more daring with those. Like I'll talk about racial injustice and stuff. But I'm talking about that stuff because it's my own direct experience. So it's like, yeah, you don't have to like it, but you can't say it's not true for me.
Of course.
Right? And that triggers a lot of the, especially the white supremacy deniers and the racism deniers and all of that. And I kind of enjoy that. I enjoy triggering those people because I think they need to be triggered more these days and not be so stealth in their beliefs.
Where do they come from? Like they must not follow you, or do they follow you?
Well, what'll happen is most of my followers, they're like, great, they love it, blah, blah, blah. Somebody will share it, because a lot of my stuff gets shared, and then someone will share it who has a big following, and then all their followers come over, and that's where I get all the heat.
Got it.
Is from these kind of rando followers.
I love your Instagram content. It's so good. It's also very impressive because it doesn't look like any of it is edited. It's just you off the cuff, but you speak in a very tempered, thoughtful, articulate way. You don't ever seem to stumble over your thoughts, and every idea that you express is seemingly very well thought out, very balanced, and you put out great stuff, and it's so consistent too every day.
So little secret, I script those out. I'll sit down and write out the whole thing, and then I'll rehearse it several times. Sometimes I'll rehearse it 20 times because I like to do one take.
Wow.
And I'll keep doing it until it feels natural. And I'll go, I'll speak it in my own voice, right? But all of that is by design, And I've done videos on that. Some of my earlier videos were like, guys, look, don't be impressed that I'm not stumbling over my words or I'm not using fillers. I'm rehearsing this. I've written out everything I want to say.
Wow.
And the reason is because I want to be succinct. I don't want to waste your time. I want to get right to the point. I don't want to say anything that's going to accidentally trigger anybody. So, and again, I've been writing these things for years now. So I've mastered the art of communicating things succinctly because my daily doses are 150 to 175 words. These videos are probably, if I wrote it all out word for word, it would be about 200 to 300 words, which is about 1.5 to 2 minutes long, which is my sort of target range, unless I have something, a little bit more in depth to talk about. But yeah, it's all designed to kind of do one take straight through, really succinct, tell stories, and engage people in the most natural way possible. So,
what's been your most?
So it's a compliment to hear that you think that it's all off the top of my head.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me if it was completely extemporaneous, like completely off the cuff, because I know you're obviously a very articulate, well-spoken guy. Anybody listening to this podcast would say the same thing, but yeah, that makes me feel a lot better about my content. Yeah, that's awesome. So what have been some of your most popular, widely shared videos at this point?
The racism stuff is by far the most popular. Like I did this when George Floyd happened. I was in Atlanta where I was kind of quarantining at that time, and I was literally sitting on my couch. I hadn't done any racism videos, right, at all. And so that happened. That became a part of the national conversation. And I'm sitting on my couch thinking, it was like 2:00 in the afternoon. I hadn't done my video yet. And I was like, God, I did my video. Because, part of it is like a chore, a little bit. It was like, it's not, connecting with people is not a chore. It's the production. It's the pre-production, the shooting, and the post-production. That's like a good 1.5 hours. I don't have a Max working on my team that can put everything together. Max is Max's assistant. Yeah. Or videographer.
Shout out to Max.
Shout out to Max
too.
But yeah, so I was just thinking I got to get it done so I can move on with the rest of my day. And then I was like, you know what? I bet that my followers don't think that something that happened to George Floyd could happen to someone like me. And I've had these experiences that I've never really talked about publicly. I was like, maybe because I just pretty much do videos on the first thing that comes to mind that seems relatively, natural and inspiring to me. So I thought, let me just tell some of those stories. I'll just tell a couple, and I wrote out a couple of stories just to kind of remember for myself what happened. And I made the video, and that was probably like a 4-minute long video. And it was titled, I do title them purposely, with the sort of clickbait type of thing. I think that one was called What White People Can Do, or something along those lines. And posted it and didn't think anything else about it. I think I went to the park like I always did in the afternoon and walked around the park. And then next thing I know, I have like 20,000, 30,000 views by the end of the day. The next day I have like 100,000 views. Next day it's like 300,000. I was like, wow, I've never had a video.
That's amazing.
To go this one. By the end of the week, 3.5 million views. It was crazy.
Wow.
It was like, it's my first and only massively viral video. So I got to see what that was like. And, you're getting like thousands of shares and comments and celebrities reaching out and all this kind of crazy stuff. And it was really fun. My follower count doubled in the matter of a week. And so I was like, maybe they want to hear more about this stuff. So I started posting more. And I did a whole string of social justice, racism, videos, and they were all like easily 30,000, 50,000 views, 80,000 views. And I found that I had a lot to say about it because I had never really talked about it, even though I've been thinking about this stuff pretty much my entire life. I mean, I was living it, So those are the ones that have been kind of far and away the most popular. And every now and again, I'll put another one out, and it'll always like I put a Candace Owens video out the other day. It got over 100,000 views, and a bunch of haters and trolls and stuff came out.
Jeez.
And I don't even read the comments anymore. I don't know how you are with your stuff, but I've just stopped. I can't even do it, man. It's just like, whatever. You can have your own opinion about whatever you think it is.
That takes real mental muscle.
It's mostly a time thing, man. Who has time to like be going through and reading all these long paragraphs of comments where people are ignoring all the work you've done and just focusing on the one thing that they've interpreted that you got, twisted or whatever. And it's just like,
well, so what can we do? What was the title of your video? What white people
what white people can do.
Yeah. Like, cause in the aftermath of that horrible incident, there's been a lot of hysteria.
Yep.
From every side, from every angle. And we want to support. Like, I want to support. I say we as if I'm talking for
all the white people.
Anybody other than myself. I'm not. Me and my cat, that's who I'm talking for. Me and my cat want to support the cause. And I consider you a leader and a really thoughtful guy. And for people listening, because I always love to have an actionable component of my podcast episodes. And like, this is a podcast. I think one of the cornerstones of my work is empathy and compassion and helping people have a better life. Like this notion that anybody anywhere should be able to have a genius life, and not every genius life looks the same. Right. But wherever you happen to be in life, I think that you should be entitled to a good life, a life of safety and security and love. So, with that said, what's the prescription?
Yeah, so the video is titled "For White People Who Are Asking What Can You Do?" And that's an important distinction with the title, because this is not saying all white people need to do this. It's saying if you want to make a difference, this is what you can do, right? And basically what it's saying is don't look at someone like a George Floyd or any other black person as separate from you, right? That George Floyd had a family, he had dreams, he had goals, he had desires, he had everything that you have. And he happened to be born under these circumstances And now we know that, systemic racism can hinder someone's chances and options in life, from housing to education to medical, access to medical supplies to all of pretty much food deserts, like everything across the board. And so if you see someone like that as your brother, for instance, or your uncle or your son or what have you, then it gives you a certain level of empathy and compassion that you've not been conditioned to have, right? And so just eradicating that sort of knee-jerk judgment that can come from being the observer of those kinds of situations, because a lot of white people, what they do is when they hear about something like George Floyd, even progressive people, they'll think in the back of their mind, hey, what did he do? And then you got the Candace Owens crowd. The first thing they do is they start Googling arrest records to see what kind of criminal history the guys had so they can justify the police brutality, as if it's okay if he was ever arrested in his life, or if he had a warrant, or if, he was involved in some shady activity 1,000 years ago, then that's justified. He probably did something. And that's all that kind of that white supremacist indoctrination that we all have, right? You have black people doing that too. Like, we've been conditioned as well to look at someone like that and go, oh, he's got a wife beater on. He was trying to pass a $20 counterfeit bill. Yeah, definitely. He must have baited the cops. He must have said something and blah, blah, blah. But we've got so much evidence now that people have been completely just minding their own business, and such as the Breonna Taylor situation, and still they become victimized by this system that has a lot of good people in it. It's just that the system is so rotten that even if you're a decent person with good intentions, you may find yourself in a compromising position where you do something just because you have the power to do it that ends up inadvertently victimizing this community or this person or this group of people. And so just understanding that those people are your people as well. And it's not, I don't know what to do. Well, what if he was literally your brother? Like, if George Floyd was your brother, Max Lugavere's brother, what would you do, right? And that's what the video asks people to do. And it challenges white people to do that as a way of earning back the trust of the black community. Because if we're being honest, black people don't trust white people at all, right? And mostly it's because most white people in our experience are indifferent. It's not that they're antagonistic, they're just indifferent to black suffering, right? They post about, do the black thing on the Tuesday or whatever, and then they go back to whatever else they were doing. And there's so much pain and angst in the black community, and it feels like no one's paying attention anymore. It's like that kind of slacktivism that you see with everything. And I know a lot of it is cultural, but if you run the thought experiment, if George Floyd was a young blonde yoga teacher, would you still not do anything? Of course not. You would, the whole community would try to disband all the police in 24 hours because that can't be happening. Imagine if it happened on a regular basis. Imagine if every week there was a new video surfacing with another blonde yoga teacher getting choked out or getting shot or getting whatever by the cops. It'd be a completely different reaction from the white community, right? But with black people, it's almost like you're watching a video game. It's like, wow, let's turn back to the game now, or it's just like too much. I can't deal with that. It's too much. So that's all the video is saying is don't put that in a separate box. Keep that in the same box as anyone else that you care deeply about. And that will change your relationship to that incident. And you don't see yourself as separate from it, but a part of that system. And it's our responsibility. And really, you could even say it's white people's responsibility to help break down and deconstruct that system so that it can work for everybody.
I don't know anybody who didn't see what happened to George Floyd and and walk out of that, observing that anything other than, anything but being appalled by that scenario. But what are things that I can do, that listeners can do, that's supporting, but that isn't slacktivism, that's supporting, but isn't just being like, the stereotype of the virtue signaling armchair warrior, because I think that drives more divisiveness than it does cohesion among people, so how can we support and fight for justice and fight and be more compassionate and express that we care in a way that isn't just like fluff,
Yeah, I think what you're doing now, but more of that. You got slammed a few days ago for having some guy thought you had too many white guests on your podcast, or not enough people of color on your podcast, and you shot back. I've had this, that, and the other person. And
was that? Did I respond poorly?
No, you were accurate. But what I'm about to say now is, I would challenge you to have even more Black people and minorities and people of color on your podcast. And, because we both have podcasts, and what I've discovered, you've been doing this a lot longer than me, so you can relate. But when I have somebody on my podcast that's not from my community, right, I have to read their book and do all the research and blah, blah, blah. And it always inspires me to open up and consider things that I have never considered before, and understand things in ways I haven't understood them before, in order to have an in-depth, meaningful conversation. And so you having a very popular podcast gives you an opportunity to bring people on that forces you to then open up, consider things, relate to people in certain ways that you wouldn't have done before if you just only had, a handful of Black people. So I would say, challenge yourself to have more people that in an effort to not only expose your audience to different perspectives, but also to expose yourself to these different backgrounds and what these people have experienced. And then to have the open conversations like you do with people, even though they're here to talk about whatever, protein powder or whatever they're here to talk about, ask them about their personal experience with racism. Like, make that a part of your standard conversation with guests, and or systemic racism or white supremacy, because a lot of white people have relatives in Kentucky or wherever, or in Trump country, and not that there's anything, I don't think anything's wrong with any politician. I think all politicians are a reflection of the collective consciousness. So
I agree with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would make different choices from some of the politicians, but if I was really serious about change, I'd be running for office, right? And that's the challenge I give to anybody who really talks a lot of crap about whoever. Just don't tell me, show me, right? Start where you are and make a change at a local level. And that speaks louder than you just telling me how screwed up some politician is. But, I think talking to people about that and taking advantage of this time as an opportunity to have these open conversations and dialogues that most people aren't having. I would say 99% of these podcasters, especially the white ones, are afraid to go there. So make yourself unafraid to go there. And really the only way you can do that is by going there and getting uncomfortable and asking, the wrong questions or making the wrong comments. And you learn that way, because just like I learned with my daily dose going public, you're going to offend people, you're going to trigger people. But I think if people see you trying and they see that your intention is good and you want to learn, I think eventually you will become one of the top people who can have those conversations, and that people may even want to go to have that conversation, within the sort of wellness space.
Wow. I definitely value that. I'm down. I mean, I definitely, I think that I started my podcast as a way to talk about health science, with a focus on brain health. And I know that that's what my listeners tune in for. Not necessarily brain health, but for high level conversations about health science, nutrition, exercise, all that stuff. And I've been pretty agnostic about. Well, I am agnostic about race. I'm not I would say that if anything, I'm colorblind, which I've only learned recently is not a good thing, apparently.
Right.
Which has confused me even further about all this. I grew up in New York City, and I've always gone to public school, and so I've always been surrounded by people from all different cultural backgrounds, all different races, and I thought that being colorblind was like a good thing. I actually don't care at all about what a person looks like. For me, I've invited people on the podcast based on me just curiosity, wanting to learn from them. But I agree that there's been I've had people of color on my podcast. I've had brown people. I've had, white people. I've had men. I've had lots of women, I've never been commended for the fact that most of my guests have been female. But I will definitely agree that there's been there haven't been that many black people to come on the show. I didn't even know that you could actually say that word without offending people up until this year,
But that's because you rarely say it. If you say it all the time, then it would become normal.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I'm saying
But I was raised not to say like African Americans the proper way to refer to a black person.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, it's these nuances would become, you'll understand them more and more the more you have those conversations. And the whole colorblind thing, yeah, that's a very sort of offensive thing now because it means you're privileged and you have the option to not see. So I think a better way to kind of understand that is just that you've always been really accepting of people from all walks of life and all backgrounds and all cultures and all ethnicities. And that's a wonderful thing. But when it comes to, that conversation, again, if you just look at it, take race out of it and look at it as the blonde yoga teacher, thing happening. They're getting murdered all over the place. No one knows why, right? Wouldn't that come up just kind of naturally in most of your conversations? Like, what do you think about the blonde yoga teacher thing that's happening? Like, that'd be an interesting tangent.
Yes.
For all guests, really, to get their perspective on this thing. But when you have race in it, if we were talking earlier about, the Me Too thing, and like, I think a lot of white people have that sort of hesitancy because they think, well, if I say the wrong thing, I'm going to get the racial equivalent of Me Too'd and be cast as a bigot, and no one's going to listen to my thing anymore. But I think now is the time to go there because it's become a part of the national conversation. And if you're thinking it, but you're not saying it, then you're not really being authentic to yourself. And if you're not thinking it, you're not connected to reality right now, because there's an aspect of racism and privilege, even in wellness, especially in wellness. And that needs to be talked about. So why don't you talk about it?
I'm going to start right here.
This is probably the most you've ever talked about racism, right?
Oh,
your
by
podcast?
Far. I think it's probably the only time. Yeah. So I just want to celebrate you for bringing it.
Yeah, man.
Bringing it to the table. I'm sure my listeners appreciate it.
Yeah. And the ones that don't appreciate it, they're the ones that need to hear these conversations.
Yeah, exactly. Guys need to be paying attention.
But it's not even just podcasting; it's everything. Everything. Like everything. Whoever's listening right now, in your circles, if you never really talk about this, but you want to make a difference, that's how you can make a difference. Yeah. Right. I'll tell you a quick story. A friend of mine. Do you know Garen Jones?
Don't.
He's an awesome guy. He's a black guy. He's actually half black, half white. And he said, growing up, he used to play on this little playground, and these white kids would bully him all the time and come and try to pick fights with him and try to just do really mean things to him. And he would obviously run away from them and tell them to stop, but they would always just ignore him. And he said one day they were doing their thing, trying to, pick at him and chase him. And he said this other white guy happened to be on the playground, and he yelled at the guys to stop, to leave that kid alone. And he said once that happened, they never picked on him again. Right? And that's kind of the microcosm of what's happening in society is, I think a lot of white people think, well, that's the Black community's problem. They have to figure that out. They have to figure out systemic racism and how to deconstruct that and da-da-da. And they don't realize that their voice is actually more powerful than 100 Black voices. Like your voice, you saying that's not okay, could connect to somebody in a way that they would never connect with hearing these 100 Black people saying it, because they just automatically dismiss it as those guys are just being the victim. That's all that is. They need to pull themselves up and stop pretending like they don't have any chances in this society, because they do. But if one white person says it, the right white person says it, and they look at you and they look up to you, and then that makes them think about it a little bit differently. That's powerful, That's a powerful way to use your voice. So that's why I say, that's something that's probably the one thing you can do without having to change anything else about your whole life, is just talk about it more, and have an opinion about it. And the people who need to hear that will hear it, and you never know the ripple effects that conversation will have with people in your audience.
Yeah. Well, I'm certainly grateful that we were able to have this conversation.
Of course.
Thank you for being here, and sharing your knowledge. We covered a lot of different topics this episode. We started talking about marriage. This was awesome. I know you got to go. I've got just like one last question for you. Before we get to that, where can listeners find you on social media, and where can they pick up your book?
I'm at Light Watkins, LIGHTWATKINS, on social media platforms. Primarily, I'm like most active on Instagram. I haven't really figured Twitter out for myself. Twitter is kind of like my testing ground. If I want to say something pretty racy, I'll post it on Twitter and see how many likes and shares it gets. And
I do that too.
If it does, then I was like, okay, good. I'll make a video about this. So I don't know. Is that how you're supposed to use Twitter?
I don't know. Twitter can be a breeding ground for stuff you don't want to be exposed to.
Yeah, I just don't get it. There's like stuff coming at you from every direction and mentions and this, and it seems like people are retweeting a retweet of a retweet of a retweet.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you even track that? I don't know. But, and then people want to have like these side conversations with you, and it's like, why am I having a side conversation with a guy with 5 Twitter followers? Like,
right.
How is that a good use of my time?
Oh my God. Yeah, no, it's true. Twitter can be definitely a rabbit hole, and at times suck. And, it can be at times a cesspool of negativity, but I also find it a great way to get news, and to follow people who kind of fall outside of my, my purview, that I want to learn from. So I'm not saying it's good or bad, but yeah, definitely Instagram, I think, is generally a more positive, place. Although, I mean, You never know from looking at my feed recently, but yeah, but no, it's good.
Well, anyway, yeah, the book. I have a few books. The last one is called Bliss More: How to Succeed in Meditation Without Really Trying. That is a book that I wrote. It came out in 2018, and I wrote it for people who sincerely want to meditate and they just don't know how or where to get started, and what the best practices are. So it's one technique. Very simple, very easy to do, and it'll get you started so that you can get a daily practice off the ground. And then the new book is called Knowing Where to Look, and that doesn't come out for maybe like 4 or 5 months. It's in post-production right now, and it's a compilation of sort of the greatest hits of my daily inspirational emails, and it has some wonderful illustrations as well.
Love that. We didn't even talk about meditation, but Light is a brilliantly talented meditation teacher. Highly recommend doing a deep dive into his work. He teaches the method in his book. Obviously, he just said that could be a whole other podcast.
There's plenty of podcasts, interviews with me talking about that. So they can search me and they'll find those. Not anyone as good as you, obviously. But.
That's cool. Last question that gets asked everybody on the show. Light, what does it mean to you to live a genius life?
Living a genius life is living a life of service, man. Like 100%. If you're not being of service in some form or fashion, then you're not a genius in my book, right? And it's not about having a podcast or having, a big Instagram following. It's just about doing the most with what you have, whatever you have, right? Even if it's just giving someone a smile, helping somebody with, carrying groceries or just being a kind person. Like that's a really easy way to be of service.
I love that. And I couldn't agree more. Dude, thank you for being here.
100%.
Thank you for bringing, all the ideas that you just did bring to the table. Really appreciate you and your insight and what you're putting out into the world. So keep it up. And to all you guys out there in podcast land, thank you so much for tuning in.
Wait, can I plug one thing?
Yeah.
Can I plug my podcast?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So I interviewed Max on my podcast, so we could do a deep dive into your life, and I think it's a different conversation than the ones you normally have, which is all about healthy brain and stuff. We talk actually about the way you grew up and your inspirations and motivations to do what you're doing now, and that's my podcast is called At the End of the Tunnel, which focuses on the hero's journey for people like you who are being of service and telling the story behind the story behind the story.
Definitely listen to that. That was one of my favorite interviews because you came to that interview so, not just well prepared. It's not like you just had read my book, but you did like a deep dive into my backstory, like things that you and I haven't even talked about,
right?
As friends.
Yeah.
And so it was really fun getting to open up those, go back into those chapters.
Yeah, unpack some stuff. A lot of people think it's like a therapy session.
Yeah.
You go back into childhood.
Dude, that was so much fun. So definitely, what's the name of the podcast again?
At the End of the Tunnel.
At the End of the Tunnel. Check that out. Me on Light Watkins' podcast. Share your favorite episode or highlight your favorite quote from this episode of the show. Tag Light, tag myself. Spread the word about what he's doing. Check out his videos on Instagram. Text me to let me know what you thought about this episode. 310-299-9401. And I'll catch you on the next.
And if you have a problem with anything we talked about, start your own podcast and do an episode about it and send it to us.
Yes. Love that. Peace, guys.